Welcome to lecture 6. We were talking about this energy factor, which is exponential of minus E over R bar T. Remember, R bar is the universal gas constant, T is the temperature, and E is the activation energy. We were talking about some reaction. It can be A plus B giving you C plus D. It can be something like H plus O2 giving you OH plus O. We are talking about typically reactions that happen, so elementary reactions. Now, we did a small exercise towards the end of the last class. So, we took this example where the activation energy was 69.1, and then we evaluated the energy factor for two values, 300 Kelvin and 310 Kelvin, and we calculated the energy factor for these two cases, and we found that the ratio of the two was 2.45. So, at 310 Kelvin you get a number for the energy factor which is 2.4 times, about 2.5 times the factor that you get at 300 Kelvin. So, this was 69.1 kilojoule per mole, which was for H plus O2 giving you OH plus O, that reaction. Now, we also understand that this energy factor is also, in fact, it represents a fraction. It represents a fraction of molecules which are energetic enough to give you reaction. So, exponential minus E over R bar T, if it is higher, that means more molecules are reacting, more reactions are taking place. So, if you have high temperatures, for example, then you will get higher value of exponential minus E over R bar T, and we saw that it happens quite dramatically, because 10-degree increase in temperature dramatically increased the energy factor. And we can also understand that if there is some reaction which has a smaller value of E, then it is going to give you what? Smaller energy factor or larger energy factor? Smaller value of E for a given temperature? So, that will be larger energy factor. Okay. So, that means there is more reaction taking place. That means if you have smaller activation energy, then the reactions are more likely to happen at a given temperature. Okay. So, activation energy is something which we can speak of as a barrier. So, reactants will have to cross this energy barrier and move over to the product side. So, activation energy is like a barrier, it is like a hill, and if the reactants can cross over that hill, then the reactants can become products. So, there is a way to demonstrate what I just now told you in the form of a plot. Actually, just a qualitative demonstration of this. So, this is on the x axis, it is extent of reaction, and we plot energy on the y axis, and we have reactants, full reactants if the extent of energy is 0, and if the extent of reaction is 100%, then we reach products. So, what this plot tells you is that okay, you have reactants with certain amount of energy, and they will give you some extent of reaction, but to give you products they have to cross over this so called hill. So, they have to come this stage where this corresponds to an activated state. So, the way you can visualize reactions is that the reactants, if they get sufficient energy, they form an activated complex, and after making that activated complex, which is transitory in nature, that activated complex will give rise to products. So, this is the state corresponding to the activated complex, and between the reactants state at 0 extent of reaction and the activated state, this energy difference is EF, activation energy for forward reaction. Similarly, for the products, we can have this difference which is EB, which is the activation energy for the backward reaction. So, B for backward, F for forward. And if you take the difference between these two energy levels, you get what is delta HR, what is known as enthalpy of reaction. Okay. So, you need to give reactant certain amount of activation energy. Reactants need to cross this activation energy for forward reaction to be able to go to the activated state, and once they go to the activated state, then they can cross over to the products. Now, if you go the other way, if you start from the products and then you want to move in the other direction, then that reaction is of course a backward reaction. So, the backward reaction will require this energy, activation energy EB, and on getting that there will these products, we are talking about the backward reaction. So, what we are normally calling products actually reactants for the backward reaction, and though they will now go to the activated state and cross over to the reactant. So, that is the idea, and you can see that the difference between these two is the enthalpy of reaction. So, this is something which is good to know, that reactants have to cross this energy barrier to move over to the product state, but we are not analyzing this in detail, but this is standard material from chemical kinetics textbook which a chemistry student might use. Now, before we go further, there is one little thing that I would like to do, that is we wrote K as A exponential minus E over R bar T, and this K is the reaction rate constant, A is a pre-exponential factor, then you have exponential of minus E over R bar T, which is the energy factor. Now, so this is a reaction rate constant, then this has to be multiplied by few things to give you the reaction rate, isn't it? What was the reaction rate like? We wrote reaction rate for the A plus B giving you C plus T in the last class, A plus B giving you C plus T, and I said that the reaction rate is minus ddt of the concentration of A. That is what we did in the last class, we spent a lot of time on that. So, A plus B giving you C plus T, if you do minus ddt of A, then we call that reaction rate. So, is reaction rate equal to K? Let us recollect that. Is that? No, it is not that, it is multiplied by few things, right? Multiplied by concentrations. So, we wrote K into concentration of A into concentration of B. So, we did that. So, this is one way of writing the reaction rate constant. The other thing that we can do is it's basically the same thing, but just writing it in a different form. We can take log of both sides, and we get this, and if we do a temperature derivative of this, then this will become E by R bar T squared. So, that means we can write E as R bar T squared d dt of log of K. So, nothing new, but still another form of the same reaction rate expression.
We are neglecting the temperature dependence of A.
Yeah, so this is A is just a number in that case, because if we write A into exponential of minus E by R bar T, then we are tacitly assuming that A is a constant. If A had a temperature dependence, we would have written this as some A equal to B into T to the power beta. We wrote that last time. Remember, this also has an inherent temperature dependence which is weak, which from collision theory was like half to the power half, but it is probably not half, maybe something different, but it is still a weak dependence. All right, so here this is just a constant. Now, how good is this? Since you asked this question, recall that we had in fact plotted something like this in the last class. So, 1 over T on the x axis, this is similar to what Arrhenius had done apparently, 1 over T on the x axis, and then what was there on the y axis? Log of k. So, I told you then that because of the fact that things change with temperature, that pertains partly to what you were asking. Because of the fact that things change with temperature, you tend to get some data points this side, some data points this side, and you will not try to fix one straight line for all the data points. That will not work. Okay. So, this was one straight line this side, one straight line this side. So, this is the high temperature side and this is the lower temperature side. So, this is what Arrhenius had given. So, all this, the fact that pre-exponential factor written this way is a constant, is a construct of the fact that we are taking data selectively. We are choosing data in the range in which it can give you a straight line. Okay. All right. So, this is a different form, and if we use this different form, you can also, based on the last plot which looks like a hump, the one with the activation energy, extent of reaction on the x axis, the last one which we had seen, based on that we can write things like this. Okay, nothing fundamentally new, just a different form. All right. So, this is all available to you since this will be on record. So, if you are not able to write at the speed at which I am writing, it is okay, you can take this down later. Now, apart from what we have understood so far, we are also going to talk about a law which is called the law of mass action. So, again this relates to reaction rates, and this is something which you may have learnt in school, but it is a good time to remind you of this, because when we write reaction rates, we will need to talk about law of mass action. So, law of mass action is written with somewhat complex notation. So, let us observe this. We will write two terms, one for the reactant side and one for the product side, to indicate a reaction taking place. Yeah, so this has come out of the blue, so I have to explain this to you. Suppose you have a reaction like this. Suppose you have a reaction like this, then this reaction can be written in terms of what you see in terms of the sigma notation. Now, we will say that this reaction has 4 species, 2 on the reactant side and 2 on the product side. So, H, O2, OH and O. So, your this number n will be 4, number n will be 4. So, this index will go from 1 to 4, and mi are the species. Now, what are the species? Species are again 4, even though you are writing the reactant side, the species will still be 4, because you will write H, O2, OH and O all on the left hand side, and you will again write H, O2, OH and O all on the right hand side. Okay. What are these nu I prime and nu I double prime? These are coefficients for the reaction, coefficients for various species. So, let us see whether we understand this. With respect to this example which you see here, what are the nu I prime values for the different species? For H, nu I prime will be 1, for H it is 1, for O2 it is 1, for OH it is 0, For O it is 0. So, nu I prime are those coefficients which you are writing for the left hand side. So, you take all species and write everything on the left hand side. Similarly, you will take all species and write everything on the right hand side also. So, for H it is 0, for O2 0, for OH is 1 and this is 1. Okay. So, this is the situation, this is the notation, this general notation can be used to write and express any chemical reaction. Now, this is not the law of mass action, by the way, this is just a notation, right. So, what does the law of mass action tell you? It tells you that we can write d dt of mi, that is d dt of mi must be the rate of change of concentration of the ith species. So, that is equal to nu I double prime minus nu I prime into k into this all right. So, let us see what this is. d dt of mi is of interest, because this is the rate at which the concentration of the ith species is changing, the concentration of ith species is changing, right. So, that is the reaction rate. So, that is important. Now, that is equal to nu I double prime minus nu I prime into k. What is k? K must be the reaction rate constant. K is the reaction rate constant which we were writing, isn't it? We were writing k as a exponential minus e over r bar t. So, it is that same k which is coming here. I told you about nu I double prime, I told you about nu I prime. What is this notation? This is product, this is capital pi sort of, that is equal to j to n, and this is mj, mj again those species again, but for this product we are using not the notation I, but we are using a j, but it will j will again run through all numbers 1 to n, like if you have 4 species j will go from 1 to 4, and then this is mj to the power nu j prime. So, you know nu prime you already have values. So, those values will be placed here. So, that means you will get essentially a difference in stoichiometric coefficients multiplied by the reaction rate constant multiplied by the reactant species raised to different powers. Okay. So, and those powers are those coefficients on the left hand side. So, this is the law of mass action. As I told you on the previous page, we saw the just the notation. So, that is not the law of mass action, this is the law of mass action. The question is, where does the law of mass action come from? It is a phenomenological law, in the sense that people have done experiments. You can imagine the millions of experiments, not thousands, not hundreds, but millions of experiments which chemists must have done by now, and in every case this could be verified. Okay. So, this is the law of mass action, and we can use this law of mass action. We have to use law of mass action because we have to be able to write reaction rates. Combustion has chemical kinetics as integral part of it. So, you have to know how to express chemical reaction rates. So, we will just quickly look at an example of how to use this law of mass action to write reaction rate for multiple reactions taking place at the same time, multiple reactions. So, now we are going to multiple reactions. So, let us quickly try to do this. Yeah. This is j equal to 1 to n, so it will cover all species. This is cover all species, but they will be raised to the coefficients on the left hand side. Okay. All right. So, this is H plus O2 giving you OH plus O, not hard to guess the right hand side, and I call it KF1. KF1 means this is a forward reaction for the first set of reaction that we consider. So, there will be a backward reaction which is OH plus O and we will write it Kb1, the reaction rate constant, which will give you H plus O2. Again, if writing becomes a burden, then you can just stop and note this down, because you are going to get all this, right. You are going to get all this material with you. So, OH plus O gives you Kb1 plus Kb1 through Kb1 it gives you H plus O2. So, this is one set of reactions. Then there is another one. Where am I getting these reactions from? These are actual reactions which happen if you have hydrogen, oxygen, this kind of a system. So, if you have such a system, then this also is likely to happen, and this is Kf2. So, this is the first set and this is the second set, and in the second set this is the forward reaction. I will come to that. This is a forward reaction and there is a backward reaction also. All right. So, I can anticipate the question. The question must be, what is M, right. Now, M is a collision partner, in the sense that if you have, let us say, hydrogen and air, then this hydrogen may go and strike something. It might strike oxygen, it might strike nitrogen, it might strike something else if the small amount of something else is present. So, if it strikes nitrogen, let us say, then nitrogen becomes a collision partner. If it strikes something else, then that something becomes a collision partner. So, M is a collision partner. It is also called a third body. M is a third body. So, it does not have a specific identity. It can be something which is present there, against whom H2 can go and strike. So, this is called a third body. All right. So, what are we interested in? We are interested in reaction rate. So, we may like to know how dt of H can be written. This is ddt of H. How ddt of H can be written, that can be of interest. So, that is this is M. Yeah. So, that means you can write dH dt like this, based on all those 4 reactions which you see on the screen, and you have the law of mass action. So, you can tell me whether this is reasonable. Think of this as an exercise. I wrote the final expression which you see at the bottom without explaining. So, can we interpret this? Let us see let us take a look at all these terms. So, let us say the first term is Kb1 into OH into O. What is that? That must come from which one? That must come from this one. Second, yeah. So, the second reaction will give you Kb1 into OH into O, which will be dH dt, because the second reaction is producing H. So, that is dH dt through the second reaction. So, that is why it has got a positive sign here, it is not negative. Now, in the first reaction, which is the reverse of the Kb1 reaction, you get minus Kf1 into H into O2. That makes sense? The minus sign is because H is getting consumed in that reaction. Now, how are we writing all this? How are we writing Kb1 into OH into O for dH dt from the second reaction. Who is guiding us? The law of mass action. The law of mass action. So, if you look at the expression, let us see whether we can get it here. Yeah. So, if you look at this, then this one is positive, the first one Kb1 into OH into O is positive, because this must have come as plus 1, because it's for H it is 1 on the right hand side, 0 on the left hand side. So, that is why it must be positive here. So, there is a negative sign here for the forward reaction. Now, let us go to the second set. The second set is this H2 plus M, the third body reaction which we are talking about. Here you notice that there is again this plus sign here and minus sign here. You should be able to explain it now. That is okay, because the KF2 reaction is producing H. So, this must be positive, and the Kb2 reaction is consuming H. So, this must be negative. Can we explain the powers also? It is possible to explain the powers. So, in the KF2 reaction, H2 and M will both be raised to the power 1 because they have coefficients of 1, but in the Kb2 reaction H will be raised to power 2 because it had a coefficient of 2. Alright, so I have told you this. So, this gives you a clue as to how to write dH dt using law of mass action. This is definitely useful because we know that multiple things are happening here. We got essentially 2 reactions, but we also got reverses of both those reactions. So, we essentially got 4 reactions. Now, out of those 4 reactions, if I tell you that okay, there are 4 reactions happening, you may be interested in asking me this question, okay, I know that 4 reactions are taking place, but what about ddt of concentration of H? Okay. So, you can do that by writing all these terms, and so law of mass action gives you dH dt for individual reactions, and it gives you a sign of those terms either positive or negative, and you just add them. Okay. So, this tells you about law of mass action. Now, what we will do is take a small break and look at a couple of videos. So, this will be a bit of a diversion before we take up something else. So, in a few minutes we will actually be, after we watch the videos, maybe we will do something else, but I thought in this course sometimes we will have diversions like this. So, it's what I am going to show you is not directly connected to chemical kinetics, it is not directly connected to what we have been discussing, but these diversions are useful in two different sense. One is that okay, it gives you a change because you may be already tired of seeing these equations. So, that is one, and the second thing is that I am going to show you videos which will show you actual flame phenomena. Okay. When you see these flame phenomena, you may not at this stage be able to interpret all that you see, you may not be able to interpret that, but this will hopefully leave an impression in your mind. So, as we proceed during the semester, if you keep these images in your mind, if you keep what you see in the video in mind, then over a period of time these things will unravel, you will slowly understand what was happening here. Okay. So, we will do these diversions periodically. Now, we will shift to the computer screen.
experiments with the candle. That book exists today. It's called The Chemical History of the Candle by Michael Faraday, and those are his lectures. And these experiments are based on aspects of that, and they emphasize really the combustion aspects of the candle flame. In our first test, we will attempt to reignite the white vapors released by the candle when we blow it out. You can see that the flame travels back to the wick. Let's watch it again in slow motion. This tells us that the vapors released by the candle are what's burning. Our next experiment will prove that the gasified fuel from the wax fills the region inside the flame. We can extract the fuel from inside the candle using this eyedropper and blow it out. Here it is again in slow motion. The third experiment shows how heat is transferred from the candle to an index card. The radiation from the candle and the heat from the hot gases released from the burning are heating the card. At this distance, it is enough to ignite the paper. This is all accomplished without the candle flame or the index card touching. These experiments are all very simple, but they help us understand how fireworks on a much larger scale. And we are armed with this knowledge, we are able to conduct research on chemical design, create computer simulations, assess fire risk, and examine use in new kinds of fuels, all of which is aimed at the interstate balance of our protection engineering.
All right, so what did you see in this video? You have this candle flame, and then he blows it off, and then he brings another flame from outside, and you see a small flame traveling back and then getting re-established on the wick of the candle. Okay, so that's one experiment. What's the other one? What was the second one? Second one was extracting the fuel vapor, wax vapor from the inside of the candle flame with the help of an eyedropper, he said, and then he pushes the mixture, whatever he gets, gases back, and then that also gets ignited. Okay. And the third one was when he keeps this card, he calls it an index card. I don't know what exactly, maybe it's little like a cardboard or something, or just plain paper which is little stiff. Don't know exactly what he means by that. So he keeps it there, and the flame heats the paper, and the paper ignites on its own. Correct? So what aspects do you think are important here? You are talking about, first of all, diffusion flame or premixed flame? Diffusion flame. And we are talking about ignition. Ignition is something which we see. We see at least, I mean, in all these cases we are in fact seeing ignition. In the first case, you have reignition. So candle flame goes off, there is still fuel vapor coming off, you can see the fuel vapor coming off, and then you bring another flame, so that fuel vapor ignites in the presence of surrounding air. So there is ignition taking place. In the second case, you have drawn the sample from the inside of the flame, and then you push that sample again through the flame, and then that whatever you are pushing in, that catches fire. So you see that elongated flame distinct from the actual candle flame. And in the third case, you see radiation induced ignition. The radiation from the flame from the candle is actually able to ignite the index paper. Okay, so we will have some understanding of this. By now we kind of understand this to some extent, and I am asking you to remember these experiments so that in future maybe we can discuss this again. If an occasion arises, this will help you to understand this better. So I will now show you another one, which is for candle relighting, candle flame relighting, same experiment as was done in this case, and but this I thought the video is much better in the second case. So what I am going to show you is shows you that candle flame relighting, but it is in fact much better in this case. The visual effect is much stronger. Okay, another point regarding the videos, the first video that I had shown you was from the lab of fire lab of University of Maryland College Park in USA, and the professor you saw, his name is James Quinteri. So at the end there is a slide which says thanks JQ and students, there is a slide towards the end. So that was Professor James Quinteri. The videos that I showed, these are typically available on internet, on YouTube, on the websites of these labs. So the next video that I am going to show you, I found it on YouTube. So I suppose there is no issue regarding copyrights and stuff, and this is a short video, but this probably didn't come from a university. And this video I am going to show you without the sound, because sound may just distract you in this case. The slow motion replay, which I thought is really nice. Yeah, so again we will remember all this. You got to know today that such things happen. So ignition has some connection with chemical kinetics, isn't it? Because you are giving the right conditions. You have fuel, vapor, you have air, and by bringing an additional flame, what you are doing is you are locally raising the temperature, also supplying some active chemical species, which is reigniting the mixture, and then the flame gets produced, and then the flame has this tendency to propagate and establish itself on the wick. All right. So let's remember all this, and now we'll go to the regular discussion that we were having. Yeah. So we looked at elementary reaction, we looked at bimolecular reaction, and we know how to write chemical reaction rate. If we have multiple bimolecular reactions, we just now saw we have 4 reactions and how to write ddt of H, concentration of H. Now we will go one step further and see how to write rates for various reactions, and reactions, as you again know from chemistry, that there are reactions which are 0 order, first order, second order, and all that. Okay. So 0 order will mean A going to products, and minus dA dt for 0 order reaction is actually this. 0 order means this concentration of A raised to the power 0. So if you go by law of mass action strictly, then you will tend to put 1 here, but that is not the way it works. So these are certain class of reactions in which it is 0 order, so that is why you see 0 here. So that means this is K, and this tells you that concentration of A is just this. So right now we are just looking at this. Not all of these are relevant to combustion, but just to understand chemical kinetics. This is not something which we are going to deal with every day. So this is 0 order. Again, if you are unable to write quickly, it is fine. Then of course there are first order reactions. So A going to products, so what's the procedure that we are adopting? We are just simply writing the rate expression for a particular reaction, then integrating this to get the concentration of the reactant as a function of time. That is what we did for the first one. In the first case, zero order reaction, concentration of A is minus kT plus A naught. A naught is the initial concentration. So here we can do the same thing, and we can write concentration of A is A naught e to the power minus kT. So this tells you about an exponential decay. So of course there will be examples when we have first order reactions, but more common will be second order reactions. So there is a type 1 of second order reaction. 2A giving you products. So minus dA dt is 2K concentration of A to the power 2, correct? dA dt must be negative because A is getting consumed. dA dt must be negative. So minus dA dt is positive. Can we explain why do we have 2 here and why we have 2 there?
The basis of law of mass reaction.
Basis is definitely law of mass action. So in every time there is a reaction takes place, 2 molecules of A are getting consumed, right? So that is why you have this number 2 here, and since the coefficient is 2, it also goes into the power. So 2 times K concentration of A squared. So again we can integrate this, and this integration will give you 1 over A minus 1 over A naught is equal to 2 times kT. So does that seem logical? You can integrate this, right? Simple enough. So this is type 1 of second order reactions. But of course there is another type which is going to be far more common. So if you have A plus B reacting and giving you products, that is type 2. So we are still talking about second order, but type 2. So A plus B giving you products and you get minus dA dt is K times, what do we write here? Concentration of A into concentration of B. Alright, we understand here that this integration will not be that straightforward, so it will take some effort. Now there is initial concentration at T equal to 0, initial concentration of A is A naught, and for B it is B naught. A is A naught, B is B naught, and this can be done. We can find out, okay, if this is an A naught and B naught, then how will concentrations of A and B change? So there is a way of integrating this and getting a result, but in the interest of time I am skipping this. So as of now for you it is just enough to know that we can derive this sort of an expression.
We'll also use the other equation for dA b by dt.
Yeah, So A and B can be related. The point is that you start with some A naught and B naught. Every time A is reacting, B is also reacting. So these can be related. So this ultimately we should be able to arrive at this. Okay. Now the derivation, of course, we are leaving out. This can be verified. Let's think about what we are doing. If you look at this expression, there are two things we have done. One is that A plus B is reacting to give you C plus D maybe. So we are writing an expression for the reaction rate which is minus dA dt. Minus dA dt is a reaction rate. So we are writing that, and we are writing it as K into A, concentration of A into concentration of B. So that's one job that we are doing. That is based on law of mass action. We know something about K. K is of course A into exponential minus E over R bar T. So we know all that. So we understand reaction rates better now. So that's one. But we are doing another thing here. We are also writing expressions for concentrations of A and B at a given point of time. And that has been the purpose in the previous expressions that we wrote also. Remember, this is what I wrote few minutes back. So if it is 2A giving you products, then how concentration of A varies with time is also obtainable. So reaction rate is this one, but here you get the concentration of A at any given point of time. You know how concentration of A is going to change. First order reaction we saw, again we wrote the reaction rate, but we also saw that the concentration of A goes through an exponential decay. So reaction rate and concentration at a given point of time, nature of variation of concentrations, we have been able to figure out quite quickly. There is something else also which you can think of, not immediately maybe, but this gives us a clue for future discussion. Let us say here A equal to A naught into exponential minus kT. This tells you that we can probably define a reaction time scale, in the sense that we can say that, all right, if A becomes a certain percentage of A naught, then we will evaluate the time corresponding to which that happens. A becomes 50% of A naught or 60% or 63%, whatever. A by A naught is a certain number that will correspond to a certain value of time for a given reaction. Smaller is the time, faster is the reaction, isn't it? So we can define some sort of a chemical reaction time. So that is very straightforward from here. Faster the reaction rate, smaller the time scale of reaction. As I said, we will take this up a little later and define it properly. As of now, this is just an initiation of thinking. We can do the same thing here. Even for a bimolecular reaction, we can think of defining some chemical time scale over which a certain percentage of reactants get consumed. Okay. Now let us use a few minutes to just think about what we have been doing on chemical kinetics. First, we talked about complete combustion does not work. Then we talked about chemical equilibrium, maybe it works in some cases. For example, in IC engines, post flame gases, flame has moved, behind the flame you have these burnt gases. So there you are more likely to get equilibrium sort of composition, equilibrium like composition, so you can do that. If you are giving sufficient time to, let us say, the exhaust products of an engine or a combustion chamber, then they have chance to equilibrate, the reactions have got chance to equilibrate, so chemical equilibrium calculations might hold. But we also understood that even chemical equilibrium is not guaranteed. In fact, it is more of an exception than the rule. In flames, for example, you have to do chemical kinetics most of the cases, almost always you have to do chemical kinetics. That means chemical kinetics means that you have to take care of rates of reactions. Okay. Now thermodynamics cannot tell you that. Till the time we were discussing enthalpy of formation, enthalpy of combustion, adiabatic flame temperature, even chemical equilibrium, we were doing thermodynamics. Chemical equilibrium pertains to classical thermodynamics. Even though it is for a reacting system, it's still classical thermodynamics, and thermodynamics doesn't tell you much about rates, doesn't tell you anything about rates. It just tells you that okay, you have reactants, you wait for sufficient length of time, it reaches equilibrium, what is the composition, what is the temperature, finished. But we are often interested in how fast things go. To put matters in perspective, I told you that okay, you have this fuel air mixture in a spark ignition engine, you give a spark and then this flame has to propagate in and it has to consume the mixture. If it consumes the mixture, then only it can produce these hot combustion gases, products of combustion, and those gases are going to push the piston down. Then you are going to get the power out of the engine, right? So you need that expansion. You are not doing combustion because you want combustion. You are doing combustion because you need power from the engine. And who will give you that? Those hot gases. How will you get those hot gases? You have to depend on combustion. If there is something else which can do better than combustion, maybe you would have used that, but nobody knows about doing that. So we are doing combustion, and we want the combustion to be over quickly. And we made an estimate in the last class. We were thinking about the time that it might take. 4 strokes is 2 revolutions, and if you know the engine speed, you can figure out how much time those 2 revolutions will take. Did you make a calculation to see how much time it will take? Order of magnitude? Okay, you haven't, but maybe you can, before you take lunch, you can do that. And so it takes a very small length of time. That's 2 revolutions. Combustion is not even 1 stroke. 4 strokes is 2 revolutions. Combustion is not even 1 full stroke, because they burn it quickly and then the gases will have to expand. The combustion time is really small. If the combustion time is small, reactions have to be fast. Reactions are actually fast when you are burning, let's say, hydrocarbon. So that means things are happening very fast. So that means there is chemical reaction. So that's why we did chemical kinetics. Okay. Now in chemical kinetics, what have we done so far? We said okay, A plus B giving C plus T. How do you understand this? You have let's say A and B as gases put together, and A molecules of A will come and strike molecules of B, and those collisions, if the conditions are right, will lead to reactions. They will lead to reactions if the reactants are approaching each other with sufficient energy. If the temperatures are high enough, they will have sufficient energy, and also the orientation of those collisions will matter. So we thought about these 2 things. So if these conditions are proper, sufficient energy, orientation of reactions, or orientations during collisions are okay, then you will get reactions. So we understood that, and we could write an expression for the specific reaction rate constant. Reaction rate constant is also called a specific reaction rate constant, which we are writing as K. We understood that it depends on Avogadro's number, it depends on dimensions of these A and B, masses, things like that. We also understood, more importantly, that it depends on temperature. It has a very strong temperature dependence, and temperature dependence comes through primarily an exponential term, which we called an energy factor, and also through a weak dependence of temperature in the pre-exponential factor. We did all that, but that helped us to understand only elementary reactions, rates of elementary reactions. What are we trying to do now? We are trying to now see different elementary reactions, and we have also learned today, if we have multiple reactions taking place, how to write the rate of consumption of one particular species in those reactions. So the example was this H plus O2, etc., all those reactions which we wrote, dH dt. How to write dH dt when multiple reactions are happening? Again, what's the motivation behind doing all this? The motivation behind doing all this is that if you have hydrocarbons burning, you are going to have multiple reactions, whether you like it or not. Hundreds of reactions. So if you put many reactions together, then you have to have some feeling as to how things go, how reaction rates change, how reaction rate depends on temperature, and how concentrations of various species change with time. So we are proceeding in that direction, and in the next class we will start considering reactions which happen in the presence of other reactions, maybe one after the other, maybe simultaneously, maybe one reaction opposing another, things like that. All right, so we are almost out of time, so we'll stop here. Thank you.